Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Kevin's Upfront Opinion today. So, today, I thought I'd set myself a challenge because on the last day of school time on Friday, I was trying to chat up badly one of the mums, which I do on a regular basis. She's used to me trying to try a few of my old fashioned chat up lines, which have never really worked. And she started asking me about my podcast that I have. Okay. And she was basically saying to me, what do you actually talk about on there? And I was do all types of things, real life things, things that affect people. Got started because obviously I had mental health issues. Okay, I had breakdown and everything. And she said to me, she said, Kevin, would you consider talking about um, domestic abuse or domestic violence? And I said, why are you asking? And she said, well, because obviously I used to suffer from domestic violence. I said, yeah, I'm aware of that. Your husband has told me. Um, and I said, I can do it, but for me, it's a bit challenging to actually do something like this. And the main reason it's difficult is one, I've never been a victim of domestic violence. I've never been in a relationship where there's any kind of domestic abuse of any kind. Go and ask my ex-wife or any of my girlfriends or anything. There's never been any domestic abuse of any form at any stage in any of my relationship, from them or from me towards them. Okay. So from that point of view, it's hard to do it. Okay. And the people that I know that have suffered from domestic abuse, they do not want to talk to me about it. Mainly because they know I've worked in the media, and they're too scared. Either I'll put it on the radio, I'll put it in the newspaper, or I'll put it on something like this. And also, they're talking to a man. And all the people that I know that have suffered from domestic abuse have suffered abuse from men. So why would they want to speak to a man about it? Okay, unless it's maybe a shrink. So I can understand why they wouldn't want to. So what I started thinking was, the only way that I could actually do this video is if I do it at first-hand witness accounts. When I say that, it's what I've personally witnessed it myself. Now, I know you're all going to be saying, but you said 2 minutes ago that you've never had it in any of your relationships, which is true, I haven't. But what I have witnessed is what my mum went through. And I'm probably going to get a load of shit for this. Okay, but I'm still going to do it because I don't care. Now, I don't talk to my mother anymore. I ain't spoken to my mother in, but, well, I was going to say 18 months, but I spoke to her on Boxing Day for about 30 seconds. Apart from that, I haven't spoken to her in 18 months, if not longer. Now, the thing is, if you ever speak to any kind of psychologist, they will always tell you your childhood will affect the person that you become. In essence, I'd actually believe that. I believe that wholeheartedly. Because the reality is, if I go through my childhood, the only thing I actually ever got to know was abuse of one form or the other, and addiction. That's all I got to live with. Okay, and I don't entirely blame my mother for it. My father was an alcoholic. My mother was borderline alcoholic. I was around. Was always in a pub at the weekend. You know, that's the one thing I did know. Around gambling all as a child, you'd think I'd have turned to addiction myself, which I managed to avoid personally. But, so what I'm going to do is go from my stepfather's to my mum's current husband, back to my actual father. So if I take a look at my stepfather, okay, which is my youngest brother's dad. Now, I don't know if my brother knows this, so I'm hoping that he doesn't watch this, because if he doesn't know about it, I'd rather he doesn't know about it. Now, approximately about 12 months before he passed away, and before he took his own life, there was an incident between my mother and my stepfather. Now, I don't even know what it was about, but what I can remember is what happened. Now, this happened on a Sunday afternoon, probably around about 5, 6 o'clock in the evening. Okay, and there was loads of shouting and bawling and everything, which was quite ironic because they never used to argue really. Very rare, but they would actually argue. And I remember going into the bathroom, and we lived in an old Victorian house in Woolston. It's around about early 1900s, so it's barely Victorian. Okay. And the bathroom was downstairs at the back of the house. And I remember walking through the kitchen into the bathroom, and my stepfather had my mother over the bath. Okay, as in her head was over the bath, as if you was just going to wash your hair. Instead of getting into a full shower or anything or a bath, as if you was just going to wash your hair. And he had her over there, both hands around her neck. Now, he's a big guy. When I say a big guy, a sheet metal worker, so, he was substantial, he was able to look after himself. And I still remember, to this day, of my mother looking at me into my eyes and her just puking up blood. Now, I don't know if that's normal for when somebody's being strangled. And then for some reason, and I was actually there, he stopped. And I don't know why he stopped. Maybe he realised what he was doing and that he was going too far. Okay, I think stage of having somebody's head over a bath, okay, I think that's the step when you go too far. And my mum took me, my brother and my sister, because my sister's only a year younger than me, okay, out of the house, up to my aunt and uncles, who lived about half a mile, and they still live in that house to this day. And this is what, about 1986, I would say, maybe not, yeah, about 1986 this would have been, maybe 87. So my brother would have only been about 1 or 2 at this time. And when we got there, my uncle got in his Ford Sierra Sapphire, nice piece of machinery that was, got in the car, drove round to our house to go and see my stepfather. And he was gone for about an hour, maybe 2 hours. Now, what was said in that conversation? To be honest, I don't know. I've never asked my mother what was said. And obviously I can't ask my stepfather because he's been dead for the best part of 30 years now. So I'm unable to ask him what was said. But we were able to go back to that house that evening. And nothing like that ever happened again. But I'd like to say that was the last time my mother ever suffered any type of domestic abuse, but it wasn't. And the irony is, like I said, he sadly passed away about a year later. He took his own life. And then my mum met another guy who was a drinker, works in the gambling industry. I don't know if he's still alive or anything. I haven't seen him in over 20 years. I haven't seen him since about 1996, 97, because my mum was with him for about 9 years. And the problem with that relationship that she had with was there was a lot of toxicity. It was very toxic. It was all surrounded around booze and gambling. They both worked in the gambling industry. Okay, he worked for Corals, she worked for Ladbrokes. You know, they were always in the pub on a Saturday and Sunday. On their day off, which used to be, got a feeling it was a Tuesday, they would normally go to one of the race courses, which means drinking as well. You know, and I remember eventually there was one particular occasion because they always used to go to Woolston Conservative Club, not a Labour club, Conservative club. Okay, so I'm big, sorry for you Labour voters. Used to mainly go to a Conservative club. Used to sometimes go to Labour, okay, but prominently a Conservative club. And on this one occasion, they'd been down the social club all Sunday afternoon. Completely wasted the two of them was. Then we went home, drive home as well. Before anybody says about anything about drink driving, had roast dinner, and then we came back out that evening because they would always go down for the bingo. You know, you would have the bingo, what about 7, 8 o'clock, and then you would have a disco. Now, for some reason, and for the love and money of it, I can't remember why, there was some kind of dispute about something. I'm guessing, because I know what their relationship was like, probably to do with his ex-wife, but he'd never got divorced from, because they were planning on allegedly getting married, which they never did get married. He walked out, drove home, because he didn't live with my mother, and he had his own flat, which was like upstairs, downstairs, 2 flats splitting. I remember this because it was in Bitton Village, and it was like a front door. It's not an oak door, but that kind of thing. And you know, you had like a thin panel of glass, and there was separate pieces of glass going down. And I remember my mum driving us round to his house. She was absolutely bladdered. You know, she'd been drinking all day. Probably wine, knowing my mother, because she used to drink dry German wines. The only one which wasn't German was Le Piattior, or however you pronounce it. Somebody can put me right. The German ones, I'm not going to try and pronounce because I can't pronounce them. I'll be honest, the only one I can pronounce is Hock, and the other one was Liefring, or however you pronounce it, I can't pronounce it. And I remember this evening, because she was banging on the door, and he wouldn't answer. And I don't blame him for answering, you know, because it was just going to end up in an argument. And she got tired of it, and I remember saying to her, "Come on, let's just go. Let's just go." And she said no, pushed me away, and she put her foot through the glass, undid the lock. You know, she could have got done for burglary, breaking and entering at the end of the day. And she started walking up the stairs, so it's like a flight of stairs. Okay, and he came out onto the landing, and there was a slight struggle between them. And I'm not going to say that he intentionally pushed her. Okay, but what I will say is she did end up going down a flight of stairs. Okay, at first sight, she got up. You got to remember, business of fun at the end of the day, and drove us home. What she realised a couple of days later, she'd actually broken her wrist. You know, and my mum, being my mother, goes and takes him back. So he's pushed her down a flight of stairs. Probably unintentionally, not really meaning it. But, you know, at the end of the day, she's come in, being the aggressor and everything. He's got every right to defend himself. Going, that's probably going a bit too far. And then the third time, now I'm liable to get myself in a lot of trouble for this, right, from saying this, because my mum's still with this person. She's married to him. And the thing is, my mother does have Alzheimer's. Okay, so she probably ain't going to remember this. But I remember it because I was there. And I was, on this occasion, there was 4 people that were there. That was me, my mother, my mum's scumbag husband, okay, and his daughter, his youngest daughter, Amelia. Now, at the time, okay, and I've got to tread a bit carefully because his daughter was going for a rough period because she was going through mental health issues. One was it? Anorexia. And she was been placed into a place to stay to sort herself out. Okay, and she was only young. She was what, about 15, 16, I think. And to be honest, my stepsister, because that's what she is, you know, she's a lovely girl. She really is a lovely girl. I could never say anything bad about her. Got nothing bad to say about her, let alone that as well. And at the time, because I remember this was, guess what? A Sunday again. Yeah, something about Sundays. My mother should avoid Sundays. And my stepfather was due to take her back to this home. And he came in to say that he's going to take her back. But he decided to come in aggressively. Now, the only thing that saved my mother at the time was I was in the room. Because if he had done anything, I probably would have sparked him the fuck up. Okay. And he's lucky I never knocked his block off for what he went to do. Okay. Because what he went to do was he went to physically attack my mother. Okay. In front of me. But he looked at me. And that was the thing that saved him. Okay. Now, I'm not a violent person. I'm not. You know, I think I've been in about 2 fights in my life. And they were both when I was at school. And I openly admit, you know, I used to suffer with mood swings due to my epilepsy and because of the medication I was on. Okay, it used to affect me pretty badly. And I hit 2 people, and I still don't know to this day why I even hit them. And I ended up apologising to the 2 guys, but I did actually hit and got in a fight with. Apart from that, I've never been in a fight in my life. Right. But on this occasion, he came in and basically tried to square up to my mother. Yeah. Thinks he's the big man. And the reason was this. Because nobody knew, because everybody wanted to believe there was a reason my stepsister was suffering from an anorexia. Because it's always easier if there's somebody to blame. You know, maybe she's being abused at home. I'm not saying she wasn't. Okay. Maybe he'd been a bad father. Or maybe she's being bullied. Or there's something. Because then you've got something to blame. Now, the thing is, when you're a step-parent, I know this myself, because obviously I've got a stepdaughter myself, it's really difficult. Okay. It's really difficult to be a step-parent. Okay. And when it came to it, and I still remember, she basically said it was because of my mother and because she showed no love and attention or care for her. which is all well and good if that's actually true. Now, the reality was, at the time, it was BS. It was a complete fabrication of the truth. Now, the real reason she went down this route was, God, I give myself so much aggro, I'm going to end up getting phone calls for this, was she wanted to lay on her back for some guy who had no interest in her. That's what it actually boiled down to, you know. But the reality was, it was an occasion that could have led to something really bad happening to my mother. But luckily, I was there. Now, obviously, I don't know if anything else has actually happened over the years. Mainly because my mother doesn't really speak to me anymore, and she doesn't want to speak to me for particular reasons. Okay, not because I've done anything wrong. It's to do with my daughter, and that's the reason she doesn't want to speak to me. And that's fine. Now, taking all that into account, I've got to look at the other reason of abuse that my mother suffered from. And that would be to do with my own father. And this is one of the reasons I have a lot of problems when it comes to the argument of abuse. And it's not because I want to stand up for my father, because I ain't going to. If he's guilty of it, I ain't going to defend him. Okay, I point blank right. I won't do what a lot of women do. Okay, I'm not saying all women, but a lot of women do. You know, say for instance, their son's been accused of something. Okay, they're going to defend him to the hill, and I understand that. If my father's guilty of this, okay, and there's never been any evidence showing that he's been guilty, I ain't going to defend him. You know, I've had enough arguments with my father over the years. And the problem is this. My mother, now I never saw my father really until I was about 18, 19. He was out of my life. Basically all my life. He was in my life until I was about 5, maybe 6. And then I never saw him until I was about 19. And I'm not going to go into the reasons why today. I can do that on another video. And I can speak about that another day. But in all those years, and even up until today, my mother would tell me that it came to blows when one day he came back home from work, because my father was a foreman for my uncle on building sites in London. So I'd go from Southampton to London and back every single day. And on this one particular occasion, he came back and he was pissed as a fart. And my mum claims that he grabbed a knife and went for her with that knife. And she defended herself and she kicked his ass out. That's her claim. Now, his claim, because look at it from both sides of the story, is he claims the complete opposite. He says that he came back from work, my mum was completely pissed up, okay, and she went for him with a carving knife. And he's actually said it was a carving knife. Now, the question is, should I believe it? And that's where I have the problem. Because there's potential merit in both stories. Because my mother, probably until I was in my 30s, had massive problems with alcohol abuse. You know, the one thing that felt normal in my life was seeing people having problems with alcohol or drugs. It was like second nature to me. You know, like I've already said, My mother, she used to go up. I remember as a teenager and in my 20s, going up to the off licence, Freshers just up the road, and she'd normally get either the Piat d'Or, Hock, or Liefering March, or however you pronounce it. I've never been able to pronounce it 40 years, so I'm not about to be able to pronounce it properly now. And she'd normally have 2 to 3 bottles, and they would be drunk, all those 2 to 3 bottles every single night. And she'd do that pretty much every night. And that's why I say I could easily believe if my father was telling the truth. But I could also easily believe if my mum was telling the truth. Because my father's also admitted to a lifetime that he was an alcoholic. He did used to get violent whilst if he had been drinking. And the reasons that he stopped drinking was after getting in a fight in Peckham in London. So from both sides, I can actually understand and believe it. But the reality is, you still got to look at what should people actually do. So that's my reality of my life. Never been a victim of it. In a way, I've been a victim because I've had to put up with it and I've witnessed it happening to my mother. And so I'm not entirely surprised. She's obviously ended up getting diagnosed with Alzheimer's. Got diagnosed with what a couple of years ago. So I'm not surprised as well with a lot of the mental health issues she's had over the years. Because the reality is, people are victims, are going to end up having mental health issues. You are going to, at the end of the day, you're going to get, if you manage to get away from it, okay, you're going to end up with getting those types of flashbacks and everything. No different to, say, for instance, a soldier that may have served in Iraq or Afghanistan. I appreciate it's going to be completely different. I do appreciate that before anybody starts hounding me. But they're going to get them types of flashbacks from that type of thing. Now, the reality is, what can be done? Because it's a hard argument for what you can actually do. Now, some people would say, run a mile. Soon as that first time happens, and it's a bit like the woman that, God, I watched a podcast yesterday, and I can't even remember the name of the woman that was on the podcast on YouTube, and she was a victim of domestic abuse, which was on the Heretics podcast. Let's see if we can quickly get her name up, because she's a famous actress, and she was victim to a very famous American singer. And she's pretty fit as well, to be honest, I must admit it. She was pretty hot. And knowing my luck, I'm probably not going to do it without being able to spell it. That's it. Evan Rachel Wood. Now, Evan Rachel Wood was a victim of domestic abuse. And it's like she was saying, run. Run as fast as you can and as far away as you can. But the problem is, and she even openly admitted herself, okay, that she got warned by her mother that as soon as a man gives you flowers, that's the time to run away. And the first time she suffered abuser, her abuser,
Best ever Highfield.
which I cut Marilyn Manson, that's it. The first thing he did was give her flowers. And she didn't walk away. And she's openly admitted she regretted it all her life for not walking away. Okay, but the reality is what you need to do is walk away, because the fundamental thing is whether you're a man or you're a woman and you're suffering this kind of abuse, whether it's physical or emotional, I'd argue emotional is probably worse, because bruises can always that fade. Mental, that doesn't fade. You know, trust me. I know I've had enough problems with mental health issues over the years. Okay, you've just got to get away as quickly as you can. Tell people what's going on, and those are the things you've got to do. But that's easy for me to say. That's really easy for me to say. The reality is, it's another thing doing it, and the reason I can say that is, like I said, you know, I've had mental health issues. I had a breakdown last year. Never spoke to anybody about that. And when I got to my worst, I actually remember it, because I was due to be taking my kids to school. Okay. And I kept on crying. And I don't cry. I never even cried at my granddad's funeral. Okay. That's how much I lack emotion. Never cried at my own grandfather's funeral. And he meant everything to me. He meant more than any other person in my life, apart from obviously my wife and kids, in my entire life. And on that particular day, walked the kids to school with my wife, and I just kept on crying. I got into the playground. I thought, I can't be crying in front of other kids and women and everything. They're going to think I'm a wuss. Right, so I said to my wife, so look, I've got to go. I'm just going to go walk down to the beach. I need to get some fresh air. I live, you know, I'm outside. And she said, okay. And she dropped all the kids off. And 20 minutes later, she said, are you okay? And I said, no, I'm not. And I couldn't stop crying. And I remember she came and picked me up. She came to come and get me, because I was literally sat where I normally sit on the beach. Always sit at the same place pretty much. And I'd sent this text message to my girlfriend's sister. Hadn't spoken to her in 16 years, this particular girl. She's a really nice girl. Never had a problem with her, but I hadn't spoken to her in 16. Sorry. It was just coming up for 16 years, because it was about 3 months before my daughter's birthday. And the last time I'd spoken to her was 6th of August 2009. That's the last time I'd spoken to her. I can remember exact date. And that's why I say, and the reason I had that breakdown, I refused to speak to anybody. Didn't want to tell anybody about anything that was going on. And that's the problem when it comes to domestic abuse. People just don't talk about it. They don't let people know what's actually going on, because they're too scared of what people will actually think of them if they actually say anything. And that's what people have got to change and make sure it doesn't carry on. Because if you do, there's the potential of being able to resolve the problem and maybe get you out of the situation a lot easier and a lot quicker than if you don't say anything, where it may end up getting worse. And worst case scenario, you might end up dead. And that's the reality. So let us know what you think. If you've been a victim of domestic violence, let us know how you managed to get yourself out or how you managed to resolve it. But for now, thanks for listening, and I'll speak to you all again a bit later.